Right. Good morning, councillor staff. Welcome to this policy committee meeting PP 22-7. We have councillor Scrimger and Henry joining us via Zoom, and we have an apology for lateness from councillor Monique Gray. Move in a seconder for that, please. No, we haven't. We have it on time. So we have no apologies. So we'll carry straight on through. We have no public excluded items and we have no request for the public forum. Are there any declarations of interest that anyone may have? It would appear not. So we move straight through to the agenda proper. And the first item is on page 8, which is the plan change 92, Amokara and Te Puke enabling measure, housing supply and other supporting matters. Tracy's going to lead us through this.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and elected members. This morning we are here today to seek approval to notify Plan Change 92, which is for the Aomakaraua and Te Puke enabling housing supply and other matters. As you'll be aware, the RMA was amended in late December 2021, requiring our council to make changes to our district plan to remove onerous planning restrictions for the development of housing. And these changes apply to Aomakaraua and Te Puke. And some of the changes have immediate legal effect as soon as we notify the plan change this Saturday, 20th of August. We've had a team of consultants and staff working on this plan change over the last while, and it's been a big push to get here today to get the plan change ready for notification. So as I mentioned, we must notify by the 20th of August. That's legally mandated. The aim has been to accommodate medium density residential standards as required by the legislation, but also we've been needing to address some of the concerns that the community did raise through our consultation and engagement period. We're also here to seek approval to notify the notice of requirement for the 10 hectares of active reserve in Aomakaraua. And although this is a significant milestone for the team today, it's by no means it's not the end of the process. So once we notify, we'll then be open for submissions, and through the submission process, we can make changes to the rules as required. And once we complete the submission period, we'll then be summarising, and a hearing will be likely held in the first quarter of next year, and a decision will be in front of an independent panel of commissioners, which is required by August 2023. So I'd like to thank you for your involvement and engagement in the plan change to date, and we're happy to take any questions.
Right, so are there any questions of staff? Councillor Granger, Councillor Denia.
Good morning, thank you. And firstly, my congratulations and sympathies to those who had to put all that paper together. Don't envy that task. I did send in a bunch of corrections and things yesterday to Charlene. Did they come through?
Oh. Do you want me to cover that off?
Yeah, sure.
Staff have recommended that there's I'll let you all know, a fourth recommendation, which will be a new number 4, and not the current number 4 will become number 5. And it reads that prior to notification, staff be authorised to make minor editorial changes to Plan Change 92 Aomakaraua and Te Puke enabling housing, supply and other supporting matters, and to the notice of requirement for a 10 hectare area of land for future sports fields on the corner of Proll Road and Aomakaraua Road. That's to tidy up any of those. So if you can send them through to staff, unless you've got a question on some of them.
Well, I've sent that through, but I have one more question that's not a correction or anything. It's just wanting some clarification. On page 117 of the plan change documentation, it has an objective to provide interconnected multimodal transport networks that provide safe, attractive and efficient movement of pedestrians, cyclists, motor vehicles, and provides for effective public transport. And my question is, how is this addressed or assisted by Plan Change 92? Plan Change 92 does not provide an Aomakaraua internal bus service or improved bus services to Tauranga or Katikati or Auckland. And I understand, no, I know that we have to say these things by deed of our Wellington Masters, but how can Western Bay of Plenty District Council actually deliver anything that will reduce car usage through a plan change like such as this, when it's regional council anyway. So why are those sorts of words in there?
There's several reasons, I suppose, to cover for that. Part, I think Mr. Hexton might cover a little bit as well around. There's also requirements in the NPS urban development to have such objectives and policies in our plan. And the other thing is, got to bear in mind this plan changes for 10 to 20 years, so it's not immediately. So I think it's what is envisaged is in due course, as Aotearoa gets to more of a critical mass of numbers of people, then obviously you will start to pick up more on the public transport and those sorts of things. So you need the objectives and the policies in place now to enable that to be brought in as the place starts to develop. I mean, there have been some very preliminary discussions with the likes of the regional council, who are the current public transport providers, so to look at providing for those sorts of things. We're also picking it up through the structure plan in terms of much more enhanced walkways, cycleways and things like that. So it allows for some of that modal shift as well.
Yes, but we're never going to have a internal bus service in Aotearoa running people backwards and forwards from up and down the peninsula. I mean, you need 400,000 people to make a public transport system efficient. And we're talking about 10,000, it's about 6%. So I still question how we can go out and say something like that when we can't possibly deliver on it even in the future. It's, I don't know, it just doesn't seem right to be saying that we're going to achieve that with the plan change.
I suppose the other part there is that it's also around the government's push these days to be shown that we are going towards modal shift. And unless we then reflect that in our district plans, it makes it much harder for us to go to central government to get funding for other bits and pieces, whether it be like through the RAF funding for the Aotearoa intersection, or, you know, as I say, in due course to get funding to bring them on stream. I mean, there have been talks about, in due course, yes, currently the numbers probably won't work for public transport, but the way things are moving, you could have like a minibus service. And there has been talk, you know, I've heard the regional council start to mention things like that could happen in the future.
But I think the point that Murray's making, it will take regional council because they're responsible for public transport. You might want to have a word in conjunction with, just to clarify that, you know, this is going to take the regional council to deliver the service if required by the community. Just reword that a little bit.
Yep, happy to have a look at the wording. Absolutely.
Does that cover it, Murray?
Well,
It's
yes
an
and no,
objective,
because
so
even the regional council, I don't think it's ever really going to happen out there. I mean, the whole problem with this MDRS provision was they stated in their stuff to Parliament that it was designed for tier 1 councils, which unfortunately we fall into, where there is blocks of population close to transport centres and things like that. That's what they're trying to deal with. And Western Bay's Te Puke and Aotearoa don't fall into the definition of what the government was trying to achieve. And we've become an anomaly. And we're stuck with it because the government decided it, because we happen to be a tier 1 growth council. But really, Te Puke and Aotearoa do not fit with what the government's trying to do in terms of close to population centres and public transport.
I hear it's an objective rather than a stated goal. So I think, you know, it's really the wording around that, Philip.
Yeah. And I think, Your Worship, it's also looking at the objective in its totality. So it's not just about public transport, it's about increasing density of development, more compact urban settlement, which we're doing. It's more integrated, connected facilities, which we're doing. Infrastructure of all sorts and public transport. So it's a limit to how far that will go, including high density development in stage 3. So we're actually, it's doing all those things together. I suppose it's the nth degree of how far do you take public transport. It's not actually saying in there that thou shalt be providing, for example, buses every 3 minutes or 5 or anything like that. It's just sort of leaving it open for those types of things to be able to occur in the future.
Right. So James, you had a question?
Yeah, it's a simpler one, I think. Can you please just confirm to me that the ability to charge Fincos is in place now, right away? Because I know there was a potential issue there.
Almost, it'll be in place on the 20th of August. We've got the Environment Court approval to be able to charge financial contributions for permitted activities, residential activities. So we've got that nod from the Environment Court, yes.
Great, good to hear. Thank you.
And Mark, you've got...
Would emphasising the provision of a railway station go a long way to meeting Murray's concerns? I mean, it's in there or was in one of the plans that I saw, but it's not really emphasised.
Well, there is the potential to use rail. Who's going to pay the bill? I don't know, but
Long way down the track.
Yep, and it's on the concept plan as a possibility, and it's up to the future community in 30 years' time to decide whether they can make it work or not.
right, councillor Murray Binge.
I support what Murray is saying about public transport, because when you look at Te Puna to Omokoroa, the first stage, Takatimu to Te Puna, obviously will cater for buses, but from Te Puna to Omokoroa, it will not. And somewhere along the line, there's a misfit, because if we're going to move to public transport, you've got to put it on your roads as well. And I just think it's one thing that you, sir, have worked hard for, and nobody's listened, and just hope that sometime through this complicated system that there is a reaction from central government to know that it has to do something as well. Will it help to bring the 4-laning forward? That's my first question. And a follow on from Councillor Denyer in clause 22. So you're looking at August will be ready to run with financial contributions on this lot, on this program.
For permitted activities, yes. Just for clarification, Your Worship, that clause was purely for the permitted residential dwellings. In other words, up to three dwellings can go on a site. The old financial contributions will stay for all other development until we get to a hearing process later on. So, but the decision from the Environment Court that we got plugged the gap that we had, which is meant people could actually go out and build tomorrow, put a second house on there and not pay financial contributions. They pay this week, but they wouldn't pay next week. So we plugged that gap.
Okay, thank you.
And I think just to clarify, sorry, Your Worship, is what Councillor Murray Binge has raised is quite important, why you need the wording of public transport in that objective, because when Waka Kotahi and the government start to look at, well, okay, what provisions have you got in your plans around this? If we've got that in there, it gives us much more strength to go lobbying central government for what you're talking about with the extension of the Takatimu North Link than if it's not in there.
So Murray.
Yes, this question, sir, is about item 3. And I obviously have to be fairly guarded, is what I say. But given the discussion we had in confidential performance and monitoring, are we certain that those are the blocks of land we want?
Not clear what Councillor Granger is referring to. Is it the notice of requirement? Yes. And sorry, what was your?
There was a discussion about land in performance and monitoring committee about other blocks of land. That's all.
That shouldn't have an impact, should
it? Not sure what to comment on that, not being part of that meeting. But certainly through the structure planning and through the consultation we've had, we've identified the need for a reserve of that size at Omokoroa, and this is part of the process of going through that.
But bearing in mind, Your Worship.
Yeah, I think Rachel makes a point. We're about to go out for public consultation on this. The final decision will rest with what submissions we get coming in.
Can we move into confidential, sir?
Pardon?
Can we move into confidential?
No, I don't think so. But bearing in mind it's going out for consultation, you'll get submissions coming in and then you'll make a final determination whenever on the evidence that comes in. So presumably that'll be covered in that, because the other stuff will be out of confidential by then.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Are there any other questions?
And if it's not, if it doesn't come in with submissions, Councillor Granger is still free to bring it forward at that submission time.
because we're broaching on, I'm sure councillor Granger, on the assumption that he will be re-elected, will have the ability to have a conversation with staff, and there may well be a staff recommendation come through without saying anything.
You make a submission to the commissioners and you'll decide it's good.
He could, but if he's one of the commissioners, he might rule himself out, but yeah. So I'm sure they will work their way around this. A seconder, please. Councillor Murray Benge. If there's no further discussion, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, no. I declare that carried.
Just before we move on, can I say something?
Thank you, Mayor Gary. Look, just before we move to the next agenda item, I really want to, in front of our elected members, congratulate the staff members that are at the top table. There are a number who are not, but who have been working behind the scenes to progress a significant body of work that would ordinarily take a year to 18 months to progress, and they have done that in an extraordinarily compressed time frame. And you will have seen that there's, and I can't imagine any of you have read 2,500 pages worth of material that has been appended to the Section 32 report and the plan change itself. But I do want to express my congratulations to the team. They have worked incredibly hard, and I'm incredibly proud of the work that you have produced.
Thanks for that. We now move on to pages 13 to 44, which is the council submission on the exposure draft on the national policy statement for Indigenous biodiversity. Is somebody going to cover this off, or we'll take it as read? It's a submission that's gone in.
Yes,
There's very little you can do about it. Councillor Murray Benge.
I accept that the submission has gone in, sir, but I just thought it would be quite good to have one or two explanations on it. And as I said before, people in the West Coast have got letters and they feel as though they've lost all rights to what they can do on their land, and they're quite uptight. I'm not sure which government put this in. It could well have been national, but it does seem to be creating significant controversy when the letters are received. Could staff comment?
Perhaps the answer, Your Worship, is we did the bulk of that in 1994. So we sorted that out by the year 2000, where we'd consulted a lot with landowners. So we've had a lot of work with landowners over the years. I mean, to me, and talking with Tracy about it, and also Abby that prepared the report, she's away on annual leave. Probably the biggest effect for us is it actually becomes an LTP issue, is that now we have to, within 5 years, go out and just recheck our significant natural areas to make sure that we've still got it right. So it's sort of more financial, but in terms of rules and what's in our district plan, we're well ahead of the rest of the country.
And our protection lots and all that sort of thing we put in place is basically what this is proposing to do, is what Western Bay did back in 1994. Councillor Dean and then Denia.
Mr. Chairman, I think this is well done. However, it doesn't actually, the proposed national policy statement doesn't do anything to address individual plant species that are rare and endangered. It looks after ecosystems and significant natural areas, but not individual plant species. And there's nothing in there of how we could actually look after them. And the same also, there's nothing in there about pest control, which is absolutely a crucial element in looking after significant natural areas.
Philip, do you want to comment on that? It's pretty much regional council and the pest free.
Yes, and I think if there were rules in that to that vein, I think what Councillor Murray Benge was saying about West Coast is, I'd even be more angry. I mean, it's a big issue that we faced when we went out, but again, Your Worship, I think, as you said earlier on, with what we did through the Protection Act rule, we have a much better relationship with our rural community around, protecting these things. I think that there was some discussion, Councillor Dean, around individual species, but again, that can be up to individual councils as they get into the detail of this. If they've got something particularly different or rare they want to address, that is still open to each individual council. Yeah, and that comes through, I think, as Worship was also suggesting, along with pest control, the regional council has to do a regional biodiversity strategies. That's probably the time to bring those things to the fore.
Yeah.
James?
Well, firstly, just to follow up Mark's, Councillor Dean's comment, is that I understand the government is going to review the Wildlife Act 1953, so it'll be species protection, I believe, will come under that. But that's not my main point. My point I want to say is that I'm pretty disappointed that there's no exemption for plantation forests that we requested. Because am I right? I want to ask the question: is it saying that conventional plantation forestry of an at-risk species like kauri is no longer allowed? That's a pretty major change, and there'll be plenty of people whose forestry investments will just be rendered worthless. So what can be done there?
You raise a good point, Councillor Dean. It's something I looked at quite carefully, because in the past we have worked with landowners that have done exactly that. They've put up stands of kauri or rimu or kakatea where they want on straight pasture, so it's not naturally occurring. And we've worked with those landowners and actually then put a note on file to say that this was specifically planted, so it's not a naturally occurring one, to protect them from those rules in the future. But looking at it, I think that could still continue, but it's making sure that those landowners document it correctly, because you don't want someone from DOC or Forest and Bird coming along in 30 years' time and saying that's it's a natural feature, when in actual fact it's purposely planted. So there are ways around that, and we have used that in the past.
I accept that, but I'm just concerned that the MPS will override the good intentions that this council might have about that.
But my understanding, there's other legislation going through which we are party to around the definition of forestry, and that's still out in the public arena at the moment. I know we've joined several others that started off on the East Coast on that very issue.
That was about carbon farming, though. That was to do with the desire to not have pine forest as permanent carbon sinks. This is a different issue.
I think it went a bit further than that on native species as well, didn't it?
It was encouraging people to plant native species as permanent carbon forests. Absolutely. But this is about plantation forestry of native species.
Right. Well, I hear the comments, but the submission has already gone in. And it's really calling for a mover and a seconder. Seeing I signed it, I should move it. Take councillor votes. If there's no discussion, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, no. I declare that carried. We now move to pages 45 to 62, which is the Water Services Entity Bill, which again has been sent in.
Mr. Chairman, is this the last time we'll be seeing Philip Martelli at our table? Or will he be here at
He will
another
be
meeting?
here through September, yes.
Sorry?
He'll be here through September, yes.
Right.
So who's going to speak to this one?
Matthew's here, sir.
Matt.
Yeah, but you've got a Matthew.
Morning, Mayor and councillors.
Right.
This paper is another submission that's been submitted. It's sought your feedback through workshops and through emails in the development of it, and had staff input as well. It went off to the select committee and was signed by the mayor.
So are there any questions? It sort of went around the houses for input. Monique? And a seconder, please. Councillor Sol.
And speaking to it, Mr. Mayor, I think although I opposed it, and I do, you had no alternative but to do what you've done. And majority decision of the council. But if this doesn't go through, quite clearly there's great division within Parliament as to whether it will survive or not. And quite clearly there's been a commitment from both ACT and National that they will reverse it if they are successful. And at the moment, it looks as though that could happen. And I just hope our council staff are ready for that change as well, which puts them in an extremely difficult position because one, they've got to go ahead, but at the same time, they've got to look back over their shoulders and know that there could be some work to do to reverse it.
I accept that. We have to accept this. And I think we put it pretty succinctly at the front end. Western Bay's view was we're comfortable with Taumata ROI, we're comfortable with resource consent. Now, the degree of discomfort is those that are not compliant. And we would have preferred those councils to be forced to become compliant at their own ratepayers' expense. But we lost that. We lost that to the significant number of small councils who will struggle on their own to become compliant. And I think there was a view that it might have forced some amalgamation that some of those little councils didn't want. And so what we've got is what we've got, and we just got to grit our teeth and bear it. So with that, if there's no speakers for or against, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, no. I declare that carried. And I think that's all on the agenda, but Mr. Ellis has just arrived. So, yeah, sorry, Councillor Orange.
Just before you close, sir, one of the things that I find sort of difficult is that we work with our staff over a period of years and we never know when they've gone. And Philip Martelli falls into that category. And if he comes back, it would be good to be able to speak because he's the one that taught me that 2015, we were going to be 4-laned to Mokoroa and the interchange was going to be done and we'd have 12,000 people in Mokoroa. Now we've got 13,000 people planned for Mokoroa and blimey, the second stage has been taken off the 10-year plan and we've had to go and find the funding to do a roundabout for that intersection. And I'm sure for him as a staff member who's worked here for so long, it must be as frustrating for them as it is for we elected members to find that you can't knock the government round their ear and tell them to get on with the job properly. And you have changes of governments and we are the victims of their incompetence. I have great sympathy for our staff who have to work with them.
All right. The critical point you were trying to make is Mr. Martelli's going, rest assured between now and the end of September, there will be a closing function where the councillors and the senior staff get together and there will be an opportunity for those speeches at that time. I think it's the 22nd of September, isn't it? I think so. I think it's the 22nd of September. So it's in your, we've tried to keep the business to a minimum so that if those want to make valedictory speeches, they're able to. And those that want to thank staff are able to do that. So with that, I'll close the meeting and thank you for your attendance.